please raise your hand for any questions or interventions. And you can see the little screenshot here on the hand raise function in case you're not familiar with Microsoft Teams. Slides will be available after the call, and we will share the link to the tool that we're launching here during the call, and we'll share the tool with all members, so obviously with all of you and anyone who is not able to join us today via email, and it will be available on our website and will also be shared with in our newsletter. With that being said, I would like to do a very quick icebreaker with you before handing over to Gabriela from Switzerland, who's been really instrumental. I really want to highlight this in pushing this forward. Switzerland has funded the development of this tool, and Gabriela has been really engaged in pushing this forward. So I do really want to highlight this and thank her for that. So let me just, excuse me, let me just share with you my screen here. Okay, so a quick icebreaker with all of you. The first thing we'd like to hear from all of you, just where are you joining us from? And you can see a little map here. What I'd like to ask you to do is please go to menti.com. I think many of you know these kind of tools by now with all the online meetings we're having. So please go to menti.com and use the code you can see here on the screen. That's 72341747. And Pauline, if you could please post this code in the chat so it's easier for people. So please use that code and just tell us where you're from. You can drag the dot that you'll see appearing roughly to the area where you're from. It doesn't need to be exact. We know that, you know, some regions are rather small in this map, but just so that we have an idea, we can see answers coming in. 3 answers, 4 answers, great. So let's just give it a few seconds so we can see where people are joining us from. Again, doesn't have to be exact. It's completely fine if it's a rough placement on where you are. And Pauline, please do keep admitting anyone else who's joining us.
Hi, Laura, I'm Ibtissam from Tunisia.
Hi, Ibtissam, it's great that you're here. Thank you. Please go, Ibtissam, you just joined us. Please go to menti.com and insert where you're joining this from, so us from. So please use the code that you see on the screen here, 72341747, and place the dot on where you're joining us from, which I'm assuming is Tunisia. Thank you. Okay, I think not everyone has answered yet, so please just go to the menti.com, use that code, and just drag the little dot to wherever in the world you are. Okay, I'm just waiting for the Tunisia dot to appear. Ibtissam, let me know if you're having trouble.
S'il te plaît, rappelle-moi le lien un peu.
Le lien, Ibtissam, le lien, c'est menti.com. Tu peux le voir sur mon écran, c'est www.menti.com. Et après, utilisez le code que tu vois ici, donc c'est 72341747.
Vous me donnez juste un petit peu de temps pour que...
Pas de problème.
Merci.
Okay, so I think, you know, some people are still inserting where they're from. That's fine. We can see that we have a lot of people from Central Europe joining us, and then some from the Nordic countries. We have a dot here in the US, in South Africa, I believe that is, or in Southern Africa, definitely in the MENA region. And then we have some dots also on Asia. Of course, this is a borderless map, but roughly speaking towards Eastern Asia and also Australia. So great, thanks for joining us. And there's, of course, also Tunisia. I think that dot will still come. Let's continue, though. And this is the last little icebreaker. What motivates you to join us today? And we're giving you 3 options: to learn about the 10 key measures, to discuss next steps for work area 1, or to interact with other members. So please do give us your motivation. Thank you. That's great to see. Okay, so we see especially Gabriela really noted, I think, Gabriela and Miriam, we see a lot of motivation for learning about the 10 key measures. So that's fantastic. We're also really excited about this. So thank you. Okay, that was just a little icebreaker to hear from you. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Gabriela for introductory remarks. Gabriela, over to you, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Nora. Hello, everyone from my side as well. I see there is quite keen interest in the 10 key measures, so I will keep my introduction short and rather leave it then to the author that we are lucky to have here, or one of the co-author, Miriam, afterwards to present. Maybe just quickly why Switzerland has been supporting this initiative, or probably why we are a member of the Global ABC, because there's other nations as well, but often it's from the Ministry of Energy or Transition, whereas for Switzerland, we are represented from the Ministry for International Cooperation. So for many years, we have been supporting the decarbonization of the building sector in other countries. And so once the Global ABC started, we found this an interesting platform to share, because we know the challenge is big and we need to get this to scale. And here is probably then leading this over to why we are leading or co-leading the work area 1, awareness and education, and why the 10 key measures, because we had a lot of feedback from all around the globe that the roadmaps and the status report, while they're good, they're quite complicated and technical and not a good introduction if I was a politician at national or regional or local level. So where would I start? Because the challenge is complex and big, and we try to break this down into 10 key measures as an entry and starting points, but always very closely linked, and we try to make this obvious also in the documents, to the global status report and the roadmap. So before I hand over to Miriam, who's one of the co-authors who I mentioned, I would like to say also this, thank you, Nora, for the introduction, but we've more coordinated and we're financing, but this exercise would not have been possible without the great support, first of the authors, then of the Secretariat, but my co-leads from work area 1 as well, Pekka and Clay. But we had extended the group a little bit, and we had closely involved World Business Council for Sustainable Development and the World Global Green Building Council. But we had also used the steering committee of the Global ABC as sounding board. So there's been many contributors to this document, and we hope this makes and enables that we really do have a helpful tool that can be used in future. Thank you. Miriam, now it's your turn.
Thank you, Gabriela. Hello, everybody. I will need the presenters right first from Nora to share my screen.
Yes, done.
Yeah. Thank you. So do you see my screen now? Is everything
Perfect.
fine? Okay,
yes.
Great, great. So this is the publication. This is how it looks like, just that you're aware of the title image. This will be made available on the website of the Global ABC. And as Gabriela already said, it's an entry point, it's short and crisp, and the magic figures numbers are 5, 10, 10. We have 5 addressing 5 key areas, 10 measures, 10 examples, so really short and crisp. And what we would like to highlight here is really that we were not inventing anything new. We were really distilling and selecting from the really wealth of information and examples that is available in the Global ABC community. These are examples from the Global ABC flagship products, from the roadmaps, regional and global ones, and also from the status reports. What was our starting point of this publication? And we also started this publication with the incorporation of building actions into NDCs. Of course, you're familiar with, if you are in this Global ABC community, which is really a core priority of the Global ABC, to make that a part, make buildings a part of the NDCs. Why are we addressing this? It's somehow the framing of our publication that we say you need somehow a target and a framing to address these different key measures. And why are we doing that? The relevance is quite clear. Once, because of the relevance of the building sector for energy-related CO2 emissions. You see that on this graph, which is also one of the global status report. 38% of the global emission emissions are attributable to the building sector. So it's really huge, and we will not be able to reach the Paris Agreement goals to limit global warming below 2 degrees without the building sector. So the relevance is given, and it really provides also the opportunities, these NDCs, to somehow provide a framework for policy action and for different measures also we are highlighting later on in this publication of the 10 key measures. What are we looking at? As I said, we are looking at 5 key areas. They are depicted here in this landscape. The 5 key areas are new buildings, existing buildings, building operations, building materials, and resilience. Why are we addressing these 5 ones? If you're familiar with the products of the Global ABC, usually we have like 8 key areas, also with the other ones being urban planning, appliances and systems, and clean energy. We really wanted to focus on the ones on transformative action, like related to the building itself. That's why we kept it a bit limited. But of course, there are many interlinkages with urban planning, but also with appliances, etc., which are formulated in this global and regional roadmap. So it's not our intention to be like very comprehensive, but really focus on what is really close to the building itself. What you also see on this graph is like the circle around with these dots, which are like possibilities of how policymakers, the target group of these publications, how they can address these key areas. Of course, by setting up policies, effective regulation strategies, which is one component, and then several enabling activities, providing targeted finance, capacity building, awareness raising, etc. And also by going forward by itself, like leading by example with own buildings, with own policies, etc., that all together shape this landscape. And it's shown as a circle to really also show that these elements are interlinked and also can also be combined. So these are now the famous 10 key measures. I will go through all of them. This is just to give you a list how we structure them. You see on the left these 5 key areas as icons, the 5 key areas we are addressing. And for every of these 5 key areas, we have selected 2 measures, which we said within this working group that these are key. And they also reflect these different roles of policymakers in shaping policies, in providing finance, in providing guidance and information, etc. I'll start with the first one, and which is also a core one, the establishment and implementation of ambitious energy codes for buildings. New buildings have a huge effect, of course, on building-related emissions, especially in emerging markets. Most buildings are not standing yet, so the building codes mandatory building codes are really important. They set minimum energy efficiency standards for buildings. On the graph on the left, you see possible elements for these minimum standards. Mostly these are building envelopes. They can also be for other elements of the building, heating, ventilation, and air condition, setting minimum standards which are important also in the view of future long-term energy demand of buildings. Ideally, these building codes need to be ambitious, they need to be strong, they should also be improved progressively and implemented effectively, and ideally also moving from more voluntary energy codes to mandatory codes. And of course, ideally also broad in scope, that they cover both, for example, commercial and residential buildings. I'll show one quick example. I will not show examples for all these key measures, but just to give you an illustration, and one example on the building codes, the Econivas Samhita in India for residential buildings, a buildings code established in 2018. The starting point was that the building stock is rapidly growing in India, and the use also of air condition, appliances, etc., is growing rapidly, and the share of residential buildings in terms of the electricity consumption will also increase. So there is really a need to somehow address all the new buildings that are still being under construction and will be built in the future. So this standard is sets minimal building envelope design standards to limit heat gains in hot climates and heat loss in cool climates. And what is interesting here in this code is that it has an emphasis on this, on natural ventilation and daylighting potential. It's also the link to passive solutions, which are also important in general. The implementation lies with the state governments and urban local bodies. So it's of course a challenge also to implement but we felt that it was an interesting case, of course, because it's a huge country addressing a huge number of buildings, the residential building area, and it has an important element, which is that it is going hand in hand with efforts to provide sustainable homes, affordable housing. And the government has committed to build 10 million affordable houses under this code. And this is an element which we feel is very important, that we also set these codes in the specific context and address also specific situations of a country. And the implementation also, which is also interesting, is supported by easy to use compliance checks and tools, and giving also their architects the flexibility to really use this code. The second one, support of the use of integrated design. Why did we select this measure? Designing buildings is, of course, is quite complex. If we want to meet net zero targets, it requires integration of different disciplines. And this graph here shows a bit that if you start from the beginning to use this integrated approach, working together between different actors, designer with real estate developers, manufacturers, contractor, etc., gives also the possibility to really make a difference and to have an impact also in terms of reduction of emissions. And with the later you are in the life cycle of a building, construction and operation phase, the possibilities to have changes is of course a bit more difficult. So supporting the use of integrated design is one of these key measures. And here also we have the rating tools and certifications and standards that come into play, because they can somehow assess and recognize buildings which go beyond the regulatory compliance, the one what we have shown before, and meet a higher standard, higher green standards. So, and with these standards and certifications, we can also contribute to like supporting these integrated designs. policymakers, governments, they have a role to play here. They can develop their own such tools or standards, or require the use of such standards, and they by this can also stimulate the markets by setting higher standards, and they can also elevate the ambition of the building code. So there is also, like, by going forward with more with higher standards, we can also have an effect on, like, the mandatory or regulatory building codes, the measure we have been presenting before. We are moving now to the existing buildings. And here, of course, the energy renovation is an extremely important part. Existing buildings are to a large extent responsible for the increase of energy-related CO2 emissions, and the performance of today's buildings depend very much on the renovation rate. And the renovation rate is sometimes very low. Europe, for example, 1% per year. So here we have really a huge gap, and if we want to increase this renovation rate, it's especially an issue of ensuring adequate funding, and this is where we see the role also of policymakers to ensure this funding and enable such kind of renovations. Of course, it's a package that is needed. It's not only the funding that is needed, it's also regulations, obligations, etc. So it's always going to get together, but the financing issue, this is the one we wanted to highlight here in this key measure. And policymakers, they can address this financing gap, and by this helping to reduce these high upfront costs of energy efficiency refurbishment, which are really a problem for many owners to do that. And important also the numbers of co-benefits of deep energy renovation, not only that we construct comfortable and healthy buildings, but it's also attractive for the building portfolio owners. It's also important in the creation of green jobs, and especially now with all these recovery initiatives around the COVID pandemic, it has also such a role to promote deep energy renovation. In the existing buildings also, we have the leading by example by decarbonizing public buildings as one of the key measures. Of course, it's not only related to existing buildings, but also as the states, municipalities usually have a large portfolios of schools, hospitals, offices, there's also a large potential to go forward and be an example for others to decarbonize their own buildings. It's not only that this measure can have an effect on their building alone, but also that by these buildings, the governments can raise awareness and educate also the industries about such kind of solutions. We are moving to the area of building operations. This is an area which has often been neglected, the proper operation of buildings. There has been more focus on the design and the envelope, for example, and this measure here is not focusing on technical options for optimized building, which is of course also important, but more on the behavior change of users. And this is of course a challenging task. The energy consumption behavior is not always rational, but there are interesting examples and also programs, for example, of energy utilities, for programs to encourage people to save energy. This goes a lot through neighborhood benchmarking, customized recommendations. And if you are aware somehow of first of your energy consumption, also compared to your peer, to your neighbors, it's seen as a first step to save energy and to reduce the overconsumption. The other key measure under the building operations is the promotion of financing for energy efficiency. These measures addresses the underinvestment in energy efficiency, and here innovative models such as energy as a service come into play that with these such models, consumers pay for their service, for energy or for cooling, whatever it is, rather than investing in physical products. And this helps on the one hand to reduce the overconsumption, and it also helps that suppliers are pushed to the use of more efficient solutions. So it's vice versa, a positive option. And especially for the public area, they are quite successful for once because of the economies of scales, which can increase efficiency because you have a large building portfolio, large buildings, and also that you can tell the people that you are using the public funds efficiently because you don't have this too high costs of for energy. In the key area building materials, we have a key measure which is related more to the information, enabling the easy access to information on carbon footprint of materials. The embodied carbon is a large share of this life cycle carbon footprint of buildings. In average buildings, it's about 10 to 20% of the whole footprint. And if we go to highly efficient buildings with very low or zero operational carbon, it can be even higher, up to 50%. So the relevance of like the embodied carbon or carbon footprint of the buildings is great. It's important, and it's also increasing. This measure focuses on the information, providing information on how is the footprint of different materials. Here in this graph, for example, differences between cement and wood, and also along the whole building life cycle, where do we have these emissions, and how and what is like in the materials comes with what emission comes with the selection of which materials. There are quite some carbon calculator tools which help to provide this information, and policymakers can use them, of course, in their own procurement policies, in their own policies, actions of green building materials, etc. But of course, they can also empower other ones by providing trustful information. They can also empower other ones, designers, investors, etc., to make informed decisions. Number 8, also on the building material, the development of public procurement policies that incentivize materials with low carbon footprint. The public procurement represents a substantial part of public expenditures. In OECD countries, it's 29% of government expenditures, so it's a large large part of the expenditure. And integrating such green criteria in procurement has also quite a high potential. You can make like the own buildings of states or governments more efficient, going in the direction of net zero. But of course, again, it's not only that they're improving their own building portfolio, but there is also, by this green procurement, by integrating green elements through the whole procurement cycle, then we can also have an impact on others to drive innovation, to adapt to low carbon materials at scale, and to make a difference also for the whole industry. One example here, we have the Buy Clean California Act, which targets the embodied carbon of construction materials which are used by the state in infrastructure projects, roads and buildings, etc. And this Buy Clean California Act has mandatory requirements for construction materials. So they have to have like a global warming potential equal or lower than an established level by the state, which is really very fixed. It's actually in July of this year that these requirements are set, and all the ones that are under a state contract have to fulfill this requirement. And this act is also accompanied by educational programs and tools, which is very important also to ensure that these requirements are adopted quickly. And the last key area is the resilience area. And here we have one key measure, which is the integration of nature-based solutions into urban plannings, buildings, and constructions. Here we wanted to really open a little bit up and not talking only about the decarbonization, but really setting it into context. And the nature-based solutions are very important elements, as they can be implemented at different scales, at city planning, with here in this graph with the green corridors, but also on individual buildings with green roofs, green facades, etc. And they have an enormous beneficial role in terms of reducing the enhancing the resilience and reducing climate-related risks, as they reduce the urban heat island effect on the one hand, but also it's better to reduce flooding risks, and on the other side also increase carbon sequestration. So there are really multiple benefits related to climate change, but also in terms of improved air quality, quality of life, etc. So these are really solutions that can be applied at different scales and have very good benefits in general. Governments can integrate such solutions in different areas, of course, in their own public spaces, green spaces of cities, for example, but also in their strategies, cooling strategies, and also in green roof regulations. There are many examples and levels where these nature-based solutions can be included. An example here again for these nature-based solutions, the green facades and sky gardens in Singapore. Singapore is, of course, facing strong density problems. It's really a small space, and green space is sometimes vanishing with development of new buildings. So the city has really started with a concept of a city in a garden, where the well-being and livability of the city is in the center. And Singapore is investing in green facades and sky gardens to improve the heat resilience and the resiliency. And they also have a target to double the surface that are covered with green roofs. Interesting is the link with this the policy landscaping for urban spaces and high rises policies that is already into force since 2009. It's like a huge program, and the strongest regulatory element is that there is a regulation that on-site greenery is required equivalent to the size of the green surface that is being lost when a site is being developed. So developers have to replace green spaces that is being lost by housing developments, but they have the ability to replace it also on the roofs and not necessarily on the ground. Last but not least, the resilience, the 10th key measure, is the development of integrated resilience strategies and plans for the built environment. And here we really want to somehow close a bit make it the holistic view of buildings, which is important, that we not only address like decarbonization, but resilience strategies in a comprehensive manner. Resilience promotes like a holistic view of urban systems. It considers both physical assets, socio-economic functions and structures, and then climate change and climate-related risk come into play. So having a strategy, risk assessments, etc., which are comprehensive, considering both like the physical part and more the social and part of a city is an important strategy to empower stakeholders to set targets, to enable communities also to adapt when faced with shocks or stresses. And finally, the key message is what we wanted to say for on all these 10 key measures. Important is this holistic approach that we want to cover the entire building life cycle, and this is required to move to zero emission and resilient building sector and construction. It needs addressing all the key areas. It needs to include different actors, and it needs different approaches to reach this goal. Efforts towards decarbonization can be mutually reinforcing, for example, by going forward with exemplary public buildings. We can also drive innovation. We can elevate the ambition of mandatory building codes. So these different key measures go also hand in hand and can reinforce each other. And importantly also that many solutions to decarbonize the building sector also strengthen resilience and with vice versa. For example, passive solutions reduce the energy consumption and also have an important resilience component. And for example, and the case of nature-based solutions, which also play a role in carbon sequestration, which would be the other part. And the final message that policymakers, senior officials, decision makers, they play, of course, a very crucial role in decarbonizing this building sector by their different approaches, by regulation, by financing, awareness raising, etc. Thanks very much. And I will now
Thank you so much, Miriam. This was a fantastic presentation, and I think we've had some really positive feedback already in the chat, that these are very clear messages and graphics. So well done, and thank you again to you and Infras, and indeed, like Gabriela said, also to the other co-leads, WRI, that's Clay, who just raised his thumb, and Pekka. As well as others who provided input. So let's go to a discussion with you, and we want to start this discussion again with some Menti questions, and some of you have already started, which is great. So please go again to menti.com. It's the same as last time. So go to menti.com and use the same code. It's 72341747. So Pauline, if you could post the code into the chat again. Je vais juste répéter en français, c'est menti.com, le code c'est 72341747. And please give us your thoughts. What examples for where and how these measures are implemented do you know? So, maybe you know a city that has just implemented a really ambitious performance-based building code. Maybe you know of a country that is really pushing integrated design. We want to hear from you. This is not this is not so that we can take additional input into the 10 key measures, because that process is closed and it's online. You've probably seen the link, but it's just to hear from you, and it's also something we're considering, a database on these examples. So please go to menti.com, use that code here 72341747, and tell us what examples you know. And I can see that we already have some input here. For instance, the aide lancement d'un projet pilote zero carbon economy in Tunisia. There's a pilot project on zero carbon economy. That's really great. And maybe some others have some examples, some projects that they're working on. New York has introduced a strict code. Indeed, that is true. I believe it's a stretch code. And that's really, I think New York is one of the city front runners, so that is a great example. Let's just give it a few seconds for others. We see an input from the Caribbean community for an energy efficiency building code that is to be adopted by all member states and other countries in tropical climates. So that's very interesting. That's a regional approach, it seems, which can be quite effective in setting regional standards. We have a maps for renovation in France, Scotland, and others with a link here. Energy efficiency code in South Africa. And a zero carbon action plan in Bogota in Colombia. That's also great. Of course, you can also give other examples beyond codes. So feel free if you have, for instance, on materials or anything else. In Kenya, we have land being made available for social housing for free if it complies with EDGE. EDGE is a standard by IFC, I believe. That's also really interesting. And in Sydney, a plan for net zero buildings from 2026 onwards. Those are some great examples. Thank you. The C40 Reinventing Cities project. Very good. So you can keep providing input. Let's go to the next Menti in the meantime, and we'll share these. We'll share all of these examples with you. If you haven't taken note and you're interested, we will share it with you. Next, please rank the implementation of each measure that Miriam just presented. So basically, what we would want to know from you here, which of these measures, in your mind, globally, is already fairly far along compared to the others, so, and which is not. So let's say, for instance, you feel that decarbonizing public buildings is comparatively doing well, you can put that on the first place. And if you feel that, let's say, nature-based solutions is not being used at all, it would be the last place. So same thing, go to menti.com, use the same code as you just did, and please give us your ranking. And it'll take a moment for results to pop in. That's normal. There you go. Okay. First vote is in. Okay. Right now we see that the codes come up on top and behavior change. Right, actually, no, the public buildings comes last. That's interesting. If you feel that doesn't reflect your views, then please give us your vote. I think we have around 35 participants, so several votes still coming in. Okay. Again, the first place would be the measure that is fairly far along, globally speaking, that is being taken up fairly well compared to the others, globally speaking. We are, of course, aware that it will vary very much depending on the country, but this is a global question. Great, fantastic. Thank you for giving us your input. Some votes still coming in, but looks like energy codes are still on top. That is good news in a way. I mean, we do know from our data that many countries do still lack mandatory energy codes, but it's also true that progress are being made, and we have seen examples in the previous Menti, so that's nice. Decarbonizing public buildings is now second. And on the bottom, we see information, access, and material. So that's really interesting also, because obviously we know that embodied carbon plays a huge role. It is on people's minds more and more now, but I think it's just the awareness is starting, the action is still lagging a bit behind. So that's really great to know. Thank you for giving us your input here. And now we want to open for Q&A. So please give us, what questions do you have on the 10 key measures? You heard the presentation from Miriam. You probably had some questions on one or the other key measures, and this is your chance. You can choose either. You can write your question if you feel more comfortable doing so. You can write your question here in the Menti, same code as before, or you can simply raise your hand and ask your question directly in speaking, so to say. And with this point, I would like to hand over to Pekka Huovila from the Sustainable Buildings and Construction Program of the One Planet Network. He is one of the co-leads of Work Area 1, and he'll be moderating the Q&A. So over to Pekka and over to all of you for your questions.
Thanks a lot, Nora, and thanks for Gabriela, Miriam, and the whole team for making the wonderful job. I like very much the illustrations that are making it concrete for people, which are the 10 key measures, and it's not like a 100-page document. It's a very simple, accessible document. While waiting for the questions, I can still maybe comment something. We had quite some vivid discussion about the illustrations. Are they reflecting all the local nature in different cultures and continents and so forth, but at least you can see which are things that can be done. And to my surprise, really, if you don't really have information about the materials, how can you think about sustainability there? That was the least favored in this poll created by Nora. And number one was energy code. Of course, it's nice to have a code. It's not always enforced, however, despite of the existence. But any questions? And I'm afraid we are already a bit over time. Just Nora or someone interrupt me if there's need to move to the next section. But
No
I still
problem.
don't
I will
see
do
any.
so. Yeah.
Still don't see any questions. Maybe Miriam, you can.
Pekka, I'm sorry to interrupt you. There is one question that somebody has asked here online. I don't know if you can see my screen. Can you see it, Pekka?
Sorry, now I see it. What will be the 10 measures next? I think in the next session we will talk about which are the next steps in this work area 1 on education awareness raising and how to implement that. I think training packages are needed. Good examples need to be shared, so that provides us a framework where we can look at how different things can be locally adapted, implemented, scaled up and mainstreamed. Was there, Miriam, something that caught your attention after having presented and seeing those Menti questions or prioritizations?
I was not surprised by that the building codes are were the top ones. I had the impression that we are quite well with that many of the key measures that we have been discussing, whether we should take them up or what is the relevance, is it more about information, making information available? And it shows me that I think we have make a good selection, especially related to the building materials, which is like the low priority in this ranking. And we felt that here, for example, is really still the need to have more information accessible and not showing like an example, a fancy example of a building which has like somehow already implemented or used such fancy materials or new materials. So it's really shows a bit also that it's still an issue of making information available. And this is perhaps also a general comment that our examples, we didn't want to show like individual buildings where we have like good technical solutions that we want to present, but really focusing on the roles of what governments or policymakers can do. And this is not not showcase one individual building.
Okay, I see one question there on this, which are examples of ambitious energy codes. And I think the work in Global ABC so far in those annual reports, global status reports, has been which are the countries that have an energy code. And there's still a lot of dark areas where you don't have any energy code. In some countries, there is an energy code which is maybe not enforced, but the question about ambitious coming from the Northern Hemisphere in EU, we have the nearly zero energy building directive, and that is very clear direction, and that also indicates that the embodied part of the materials is important, and that was at the global scale, or this like a poll, not so highly emphasized. But if anyone has like on top of the head some example of an ambitious energy code, I may not be able to give it now.
Thanks. Yeah, Pekka, if I just may come in, I think you said it really well, and this is also a very nice question. Indeed, ranked number 1, obviously, as I said, it's not representative. We are, I think, about 35 participants here, but still, it says something. I guess it says something also about the other measures that even energy codes, there's so much work to be done. But if that is comparatively far along, what does it say about the other measures? It really says we need to move fast. In terms of examples, so I think Miriam has given the example of India. They have a very interesting energy code in place. I think the interesting thing there, Miriam said it very nicely, is that that there is an approach also for affordable buildings in there, and there is an emphasis on passive solutions. So this is a very interesting one. And I think some of you also provided some nice examples when we asked you in the Menti for some cities. I think Sydney was mentioned, New York was mentioned, I believe South Africa was mentioned, the Caribbean region was mentioned. So we'll share that with you. And if you want further information specifically on those examples, I think best is if you get in touch with each other, and we can also share with you contact details if you agree, of course.
Very good.
Pekka, I think there's a third question, and then I think with that we need to wrap up.
We also have a hand up from Ibtisam.
Great. So Pekka, I would say let's take those two more questions, the one you see written here and then Ibtisam.
Okay, one comment on these codes that stipulate kilowatt hours per square meter is lacking. Well, there are a number of codes following that, but of course it's also a question of the space efficiencies. Like if you have a sustainable home, as an example, of 300 square meters or 900 square meters with a low energy consumption, is it more sustainable than the one if you can fit to 60 square meters? These are things that which are the right units. Sometimes also the issue is not like square meters, it can be cubic meters, can be turnover in different types of building. I think what is needed is the life cycle assessment about the emissions. Energy can be produced in different ways. You can produce your own energy, you can store it, etc. The consumption itself per square meter may not be the right unit. But just to speed up, if the other question comes there orally, I'm happy to answer to that.
Thanks, Pekka, and it's really great also to have someone like you on the call who's really familiar with the technical aspects. I think Ibtisam had her hand up. Ibtisam, si vous voulez poser votre question en français, je peux traduire.
Bonjour, merci à tout le monde. Moi, ma question, c'est au niveau de la feuille de route. Est-ce que c'est possible d'avoir un accompagnement, parce que moi j'ai saisi les acteurs publics, le ministère, mais il reste au niveau des compétences, parce que c'est vrai, on manque de compétences pour avoir vraiment un bâtiment économe en énergie, zéro carbone. Est-ce qu'il y a possibilité de lancer une opération pilote au niveau de la Tunisie? C'est ma question. Donc,
merci.
Voilà.
Merci. Pekka, do you want me to translate, or are you fine translating?
No, I think the question was if examples, pilot projects could be launched in Tunisia that show the nearly zero energy buildings there for the public sector. I don't know what is, maybe you can answer, Nora, better. Sure. What is the role of the global ABC Absolutely, to support in this sort of implementation? I think every time you have to customize the solution to meet the local environment, you have to study the local climate, you have to understand local use of materials, culture, these kind of things. You cannot copy paste any solutions, but those pilot projects, what could be the means of global ABC supporting, implementing solutions in Tunisia?
Yeah, so indeed the question was, can there be a support to Tunisia for a national decarbonization roadmap? And Ibtisam, I think, mentioned that there is a lack of capacity to do this. So the short answer is yes, we would love to. And this is part of what we're keen on doing. And as many of you know, we are already together with PEEP doing this in Vietnam. Cambodia has started, this is under the UNEP umbrella, and under the UNEP umbrella as well, I'm now switching hats, if you will. There's also work that's being launched in Sri Lanka and Burkina Faso on national decarbonization roadmaps. So yes, Ibtisam, we would love to. We do, I'm going to be very blunt, we do need resources for that, and I think you do as well. So that's a bit the bottleneck right now. But I'd say let's take it off bilaterally, because we would love to discuss it with you.
Nora, si vous permettez, c'est plutôt au niveau des types de matériaux à utiliser et les fiches matériaux.
Okay.
C'est là où
I
vraiment il y a...
understand. Je vous comprends. So it's more about the support materials we can provide. Yes, we have support materials like step-by-step guides and toolkits. So I would suggest let's set up a call and talk about this, because this is very interesting.
No, that's still a last thing. Doesn't
Yeah.
PIB have also an implementation in Morocco? So it's not so far from that
Yeah.
area. So maybe lessons learned also from the educational package could be brought from there.
Absolutely. So I think PIB is active both in Morocco and Tunisia. I think we're a little bit behind time. I mean, it just also reflects how much interest there is, and that's great. But I think, thanks so much for your input into the Menti polling and for your questions. I would like to close this segment on the 10 key measures. They're officially out. They're officially launched now. We shared the link in the chat. Do check it out, and we'll share it, of course, again afterwards via email. I would like now to hand over to Clay Nessler from the World Resources Institute, and Clay is also one of the co-leads for Work Area 1, and he'll be talking a bit about what's next for Work Area 1. Clay, over to you.
Thanks, Nora, and hello, everyone. First off, congratulations to Gabriella and Miriam. This is a big day, and a lot of folks worked hard to get us to this point, and I think the deliverable is amazing. Thanks to Miriam for talking through so well the content of the 10 measures. The 10 measures is a great example of creating derivative products out of the resources which have been included in the GABC global and regional roadmaps, as well as the global status report. And when I first became aware of the regional roadmaps, I frankly couldn't put them down, which means click through, I guess, in 2021 instead of flipping through a paper document. And I was struck by the organization. I was struck by the supporting data. I was struck by the structure, particularly of the regional roadmaps, which were so relevant to the work that countries and subnational governments within those countries really need to plot their own course towards net zero. And as part of Work Area 1, the co-leads talked about, well, what's next? We have a tremendous success with the 10 measures, and we look forward to using those materials in a number of different ways. But one idea that popped up, actually at a breakout session at the General Assembly meeting earlier in the year, was to take that material, and in particular the regional roadmaps, and develop a training course around it. Our focus is on education and awareness, and of course capacity building is something that comes up over and over again. There are so many needs for good, thorough, rigorous, well-structured, well-illustrated materials, an example of which we just saw in the 10 measures. But so I did some thinking about it and discussed with a few others, and I'd like to throw out just a sort of hypothesis. What I see as potentially a deliverable of Work Area 1 would be a training course. A training course that would involve 45-minute sessions, nominally minutes, because I think the training sessions could be both online or in person. So you would click through in a digital format if you wanted to take the course, if you will, or it could be presented in PowerPoint or Zoom or whatever for quote in-person learning objectives. The content would come from the regional roadmap. So if you just flip through the roadmaps, the first 2 chapters are decarbonizing buildings and energy and emissions. That would be a great introductory section. Urban planning, new buildings, existing buildings, building operations, appliances and systems, materials, resilience, and clean energy are the other 8 action areas. And then the enablers are the final section in the report, which is capacity building, finance, and multi-stakeholder engagement. Those break down very neatly, I think, into, half an hour, 45-minute segments. Material would be pulled from the roadmaps as well as the references, which are plentiful and included in the roadmaps, and other sources. There are many people on this call which have deep expertise in one or more of these particular sessions. So I think there's an opportunity to potentially crowdsource a class that would comprise of 10 classes, a course, if you will, and various organizations could take the lead in starting with roadmap content and those references, adding materials from the 10 measures, such as the case studies. I love the graphics. We ought to continue those graphics as kind of the metaphor for the training class, so we can build on the great work that Gabrielle and Miriam did, and put this together. I just did kind of a quick stream of consciousness mapping. WRI and C40, very involved in urban planning. NBI, the World Green Building Council, Architecture 2030, could really lean in on new buildings. EuroAce, BPIE could really lean in on existing buildings. Building Operations, ASHRAE, other international organizations have deep expertise in building operations. U4E, part of UNEP, the Cool Coalition, could take on the role for appliances and systems. World Business Council for Sustainable Development and WGBC could focus on materials and embodied carbon. Resilient Shift and other organizations focused on resilience. C40 could focus on that. IRENA, WRI, and others could focus on clean energy. The idea would be that we would solicit volunteers who would lead the development of a training class. The co-chairs, hopefully, and other volunteers would create kind of the overall format, the structure, the template, if you will, and then we would work independently to basically crowdsource training materials. And that's about as far as I've thought. They would qualify for continuing education units for architects, engineers, and other professionals. So let's make this part of professional development. I know personally in some work I'm doing, I would use this class with university students. I would love to host a 10 class after school kind of series of zero carbon or building decarbonization classes at local universities, soliciting our subject matter experts. That's only one example of how I think we could use this. So let's start talking about this. Any comments, please feel free to type them into the chat, raise your hand, and I'll ask Nora to help me identify people that raised their hand. But we would love to hear your opinion on this, and we'd especially love people who would raise their hand and volunteer to be on a small working group that might scope this out. So enough talking, more questions.
Clay, this was fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm already super motivated to get this going based on what you said. Let's maybe start with just a quick Menti. We love Menti at Global ABC. We want to know two things from you. The first is, what trainings do you already know? Because of course, we also want to build on things that are already there. And the second is, for what Clay just said, which organizations could be involved? Of course, you can mention your own, but you can also mention others that you're aware of. And if you have direct questions, comments to Clay or anyone else, you can, as Clay said, post them in the chat or raise your hand. But let me just share my screen again for a quick Menti. And this is not the Menti, this is our page. So what sustainable buildings trainings do you know that exist already? So it's the same code as before. So please go to menti.com. Use the code 72341747. Pauline, could you just post the code again in the chat? And just, yeah, feel free to mention any trainings you're aware of. And we already have 2 submissions. Lalitpur Metropolitan City, who, by the way, is a Global ABC member, they're providing training to construct green homes. That's really interesting because I think that's also locally adapted. We have Edge, of course. We have courses by the Brussels Environmental Agency, University of Cape Town, one of our newest members. That's really great. And also the International Code Council. The rating by the South Africa Green Building Council, I hope I'm saying that right, and Architecture 2030. Okay, lots coming in here. That's really nice. The Climate Literacy Program by RIBA. Really nice. So these are all things, of course, to take into consideration if we are to go ahead with what we're having in mind. But you know, if and when we have the resources, we'd also love to have a bit of a database on trainings that are already ongoing, and just also to promote the fantastic work that our members are doing. A program on Thorn Park construction training in a school in Zambia. That's really interesting. And the ADEM massive open online course, indeed. ResNet is being mentioned. That's really nice. And I think we also have indeed an online course on energy efficiency for Brazil. I think the IEA has courses for some of the emerging economies, Brazil being one. I think there are others as well. We have one person saying no, that's also fine. Ecosur has some for the LAC region, and LEAD, of course, indeed. Active House. So Clay, I think we have really nice submissions here. Maybe shall we go to the next question, London South Banks, okay, which is, sorry. Going back to what Clay said, and I think he made a fantastic pitch, you know, having a training course that can also really be used for credits. So, you know, he mentioned architects, professionals, but also universities, very, very important. For something like this, what organizations could be involved for a training course like this? And as I mentioned, you can mention your own if you're interested in being involved, or you can mention another organization that you think should be involved. Don't worry, we won't hold anyone to it in the sense of that we say you were mentioned, you have to now, but it's just to give us an idea. We have the Royal Institution for Chartered Surveyors. Very nice. And I think the Energy Management Agency of Tunisia, that's a state agency. Also they are working with PEEP, so that's great. The International Code Council, University of Cape Town, very nice, thank you. I think those are all in the call right now, so you're basically expressing your interest, which is really great. The CAA, the Commonwealth Association of Architects. And we're having also a confirmation of what you said, Clay, that EuroAce, Renovation, Renovate Europe and BPIE are some very good ones to involve on existing buildings. Yeah, Active House Alliance. And of course, the Green Building Councils, you're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. Kenya is a nice example. Clay, I think we have some interesting volunteers here. Yes. I think this is quite nice.
Indeed we do. The others I'll get to bilaterally.
Really, really great. So we of course, you know, we're also happy to just have this have a bit of a discussion with you. So let's have a bit of Q&A in the sort of more classic style. So feel free to post your questions or comments here, or just raise your hand.
We had 2 hands up from Dr. Dinesh Kumar Sharma and from York.
Please go ahead. Dr. Dinesh first and then York.
Dr. Dinesh?
Don't hear you, so I'm not sure if your mic is muted, Dr. Dinesh. Otherwise, York, you can go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly. I'm very sorry. I'm dialing in with my mobile phone, so I can't use the Menti board or the chat. But I'm very much supporting Clay's presentation and idea to roll this out in a professional education way. I see some strong synergies with the work that we are doing on the building passport. As work area 5, we are happy to take over one of the more data-laden key measures, and I also see strong synergies with the work and the let's say the networking that Jonathan Darwin is now doing, acquiring first application partners for a building passport. These are all countries who would be very, very interested in also merging that or flanking that with the application of these 10 key measures. So I see some strong synergies.
Thank you for that.
We have some more input from the Menti, DGNB. Indeed, there is some great work being done there. The Saudi Green Building Forum, I think they're also one of our new members. MEHAT, I'm not sure, Clay, if you know them. Doesn't on the top of my head, I don't know the abbreviation. And the One Planet SPC program, of course.
Yep.
Nora, sorry, MEHAT is the Minister of Equipment in Tunisia.
Oh, thank you for clarifying. I'm so sorry. I always say the full name of the ministry. That's why I don't think of it in terms of abbreviation. Thanks for clarifying. That's great.
So one question I have while others are providing questions, does anyone feel that any of the existing trainings would largely duplicate the scope of what I described initially? In either the breadth of the scope, including in the inclusion of urban planning and resilience and materials and things like that, or I think one of the things we'd really like to know up front is that we're not being redundant with anything that anyone else has created. So lots of great ideas of sources of pieces of this, but is there anything that largely overlaps this in either content or format?
We have two hands from Tom Sanya and Kiza Zera.
Okay, feel free to jump in, please.
Hi, this is Kisa from the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. Just wanted to point out there's nothing, we're not duplicating what you just said, Clay, Lester. We're looking into this issue. So we have the sustainability strategy at RICS, and we're trying to sort of embed sustainability and ESG factors within the qualifications that our surveyors get throughout the whole profession. So we're literally just starting on this journey. And in terms of the specifics, it's very difficult to tell you right now, but it's sort of a similar concept to what you just mentioned. But yeah, not duplicating it, but there's some aspects that what you mentioned that we are looking into. And we are part of doing an internal review at the moment. But we will hold some roundtables and consult some sustainability experts when it comes to, what kind of knowledge around sustainability that do we need the profession to understand and learn in the coming years.
Great. Maybe there's an opportunity to collaborate earlier rather than later,
Yes.
rather than waiting till we're both done and
yeah. No, definitely.
Maybe there's some synergy there. It could both be more comprehensive and it could be integrated. So great idea. Anyone else who would like to add in?
Yeah, I did have my hand up. So yes, I think it's a great initiative, and what I can say is that it's not, as far as I know, duplicating anything on offer. And I know quite a few courses, both local in South Africa and international. I think it's way more comprehensive in terms of the scope it's offering. But I'd also like to comment that apart from focusing on the government, I was quite excited when the presenter, excuse me, I don't remember your name, when you talked about the university students. Those are very, very important. And as we go forward, I think that's where quite a big target should be, because the guys in government are already, day-to-day basis putting out fires. And when I teach my students, one of the questions they always ask every year is, why aren't these things being done? It's not difficult, but people in government are too busy, and their minds are already set in certain ways of doing.
Thank you very much for that. That stimulates a new thought in my mind. I think we should build this in a way that is open source. I think that it should be a PowerPoint which can be modified and tailored so that someone who wants to leverage this course in South Africa could add South Africa specific content and could add local examples and could add local resources and references to make this truly tailored. I think that the initial work would be very similar to the way the roadmaps were created, a global roadmap at a high level. The regional roadmaps are more specific. This should be able to be tailored at a regional and even national level. So that is a great amendment.
Clay, if I may also just come in, hopefully you can hear me well. This is Mina Hasman. I'm representing the Commonwealth Association of Architects here today. I think it's a brilliant idea, and I was just going to encourage perhaps us collectively or yourselves to think about who the target audience would be exactly, because the training program, I think there's plenty of content out there for the design community or the built environment sector professionals. Those are that are actually engineers, architects, planners, but there's probably less content for policymakers and government officials. So I think it would be great to identify who the target audience would be for this training program. And I think also considering this as almost like a template that can be used and curated according to local context and needs is a brilliant idea.
That is great comment. And of course, learning professionals are always telling me, who is your audience? What do you want them to learn? How do they learn, right? And so I think that'll be critically important. I specifically chose the example of university students because personally I'm interested in attracting professionals into our field. I am interested in students interested in sustainability to lean in towards the built environment. So that is my hidden agenda, to get more people to work in our industry, because if we have to renovate at 3% a year, we're going to need a lot of these folks. I think it's a good point that you made about, you know, architects, engineers, surveyors have professional development. You know, Lead Edge has certification programs. Maybe something designed at a level of a interested but non-expert professional could cover both policymakers as well as things like students with a limited but general technical background. Maybe we can pick two audiences and find something that can be tailored for each. That is a great idea. Any other great ideas out there, or just ideas?
I do see another hand. I think, Mina, that might be an old hand, I think. Or is it, would you like to come in again? If not, I see Pekka has his hand up.
Just a comment about the PEEB approach when going to emerging economies. It's not to train the professionals, it's rather to train the trainers. And the trainers, I mean the local guys, they can then train different stakeholders, the client, the supply chain. And I think that is something that sounds sustainable to me. I don't know so well how successful it has been, but I think that's approach should be considered.
No, that's right. I remember the climate ambassadors when Al Gore went out and trained legions of people about the inconvenient truth and basically provided training on materials, and they went into their local communities and within their universities and within their organizations. You know, this will probably be a little more comprehensive than a 90-minute presentation, but we need to scope it anyway, and certainly a number of you could play a really key role on scoping, you know, how how detailed this is, how long this is in format and stuff like that. So Pekka, thank you. That sounded like you were volunteering, by the way, so thank you very much.
Thanks.
Clay, let's see, is there any last burning question or comment? We are almost at the hour. And I think we've had some really, really nice contributions, both in terms of who can contribute, in terms of what's already out there, and in terms of how can we take this forward. I think that was quite nice.
Okay, Nora, back to you then.
Thank you. Well, thank you again, Clay. This was fantastic. Very excited to see how we can take this forward. We have some very, very qualified volunteers, I think, and really good ideas. I think the next step is that we get the people who are keen to be involved together and sketch a bit of an outline of how we want to do this, and then maybe also get in touch with some entities that can provide the certificates we were talking about. I think that is indeed an important point. With that, we've had a really, really nice session. Thanks to all of you. And with that, we're coming, unfortunately, to the end of it. And I want to really, first of all, the beginning of the close, so to say, thank everyone. Thank all of you who joined. I know that for some of you it was very early, some of you it was late, so it's really appreciated. And a special thanks again to our work area co-leads. Again, that's Clay, who just moderated this brilliant session, Pekka from the Sustainable Buildings and Construction Program, Gabriela, whom you see here on camera from Switzerland, and of course also huge thanks to Miriam Steinemann, who did such a great job developing this tool and presenting it. We launched the 10 key measures successfully, I think, and we heard what are some measures that governments can take if they're unsure. It can seem daunting, and I think Gabriela and Clay both said it, the roadmaps are comprehensive, but they also can seem daunting. And we do hope that the 10 key measures can provide a nice entry-level resource for those who are motivated to do something, and we know that many are, but who are unsure where to start. And we are keen to take this forward, as Clay said, and to really build on it and to help people apply it as much as they can. As I said, the tool is online. Do check it out. You have the link in the chat, and we will send it around by email. If you have questions specifically on the tool, we are here. If you want to get involved in the next steps, we are here. If you haven't been able to express your idea here, then send us a message and we'll gladly get in touch. And we really look forward to taking this forward with you. With that, I would like to once more thank everyone and close the session, and wish you all a really nice day. And I hope that you'll find the 10 key measures inspiring and that you'll continue working with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good work. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.